So for today's video, what I wanted to talk about was dash cams. I'm a young driver, as most of you will know, and that means insurance is ridiculously expensive. So one of the easiest ways to bring your insurance cost down is to fit a dash cam, and that's exactly what I've done. The dash cam I've actually gone for is a Crosstour CR250, which is about 20 quid on Amazon. It's a really inexpensive dash cam, but the main thing that I wanted was to not ruin the look of my A3. So the advantage with this particular dash cam is that it fixes up against the windscreen rather than hanging down on a sort of tripod-esque suction cup mount. So jumping to the outside of the car, you can see that the dash cam is fixed to the windscreen with a sort of sticker, a little double-sided bit of plastic, and that keeps it firmly attached to the windscreen. So I've got the camera here in front of me, and as you can see there are a variety of buttons on the front, the first of which is the power button. The up and down buttons are both used for controlling various menu functions. This is a record button or lock button depending on which mode you're in, so if an incident happens and you want to lock the footage, the camera will actually lock it if it detects motion, but if you want to be extra sure, you can push the lock button and it manually locks the footage down so it can't be erased. This is a menu button. You can tap and hold this, and what it will do is it will switch to a photo mode. I personally don't see the point in having a photo mode on a camera like this, but hey ho. On the side of the camera you can see here there is a hole to shove a pin in, and you can reset the camera to its factory state if you need to. There's also the slot here for the micro SD card. On the other side you have got the microphone and the power jack, which is a mini USB for running the camera's power. Obviously you've also got a lens here on the front, as you'd expect. On the back there's a fair amount of holes here for ventilation, because the camera does actually get quite warm whilst it's recording. So it records at 1080p in 30 frames a second, which is kind of more than enough for a dash cam. I personally wouldn't want anything more, because otherwise you're chewing through SD card storage space very quickly, and as some of you will know, the more read-write cycles you put on an SD card, the higher the failure rate goes, and the last thing you want with something that's recording 24/7, or whenever you're driving anyway, is the SD card to fail on a frequent basis, because otherwise you're going to lose your recordings when you need them most. So as I say, records 1080 at 30 frames a second. It can also do 720p at 30 frames a second, and there's a 480p recording option, but I wouldn't use that because it's not 16:9. It crops the aspect ratio to 4:3, which I would argue is probably not a brilliant way to go. In terms of other features, it's got a parking detection mode. I've done some fairly extensive testing on it really, by which I mean I've dropped the camera a couple of times to see how hard an impact it needs in order to start recording, and that's exactly what it does. So if you're parked up and someone opens a door into the side of your car, or someone hits your car when it's parked, the camera will start recording, and it records for about 30 seconds unless it detects motion, at which point it continues recording for longer. And actually that's quite useful. If there's one downside to it, it is that the motion detection isn't particularly sensitive, so it does take quite a significant impact in order to trigger the camera and cause it to wake up. But that's just one of those things. I think for 20 quid you can't really expect too much, and I think the camera delivers on that. The camera's got a microphone in it, which means that if you want, you can have audio recording at all times as well. It's worth noting you can turn the microphone off, so if you don't want to have your voice recorded or your passenger's voices recorded, you can disable that. So because of the way that I've got my camera wired into the ignition, when I put my key in and turn the ignition on, whoops, there goes the video out of focus, you'll hear the camera power up any second. There you are. And then the display illuminates on the back of it and it starts recording immediately. It's worth noting the display actually, there's a screensaver mode, so you can have the display deactivate after a couple of minutes, which I think is quite useful. And the same thing goes for taking the key out of the ignition again, so if I turn it off, take the key out of the ignition, you can set an auto power off timer on the camera, so I think mine is set to turn off after 2 minutes or something like that. So my camera will shut down after I've left the vehicle and everything is locked, which again I think is actually really quite useful. One other thing that's worth noting is that the camera will actually power off a cigarette socket like this, and it will turn on with the engine in exactly the same way, regardless of whether you've got it wired into a fuse or whether you've got it plugged into your ignition like that. Whilst it's all very well talking about specifications and features, it's the video quality and the fact that you can just leave the dashcam in your car and kind of forget about it that are the reason that we're all buying dashcams these days. So I will cut over to some actual footage from the camera. So, as you can see, I've just put the SD card into my computer, which pops up immediately, and we'll navigate through into the right directory. So you can see there's a bunch of different video clips here. That is the way this camera records, and in fact most dash cams, it records on a loop. So my one is set to record in 5-minute increments of time, so you can choose to have it as either 1 minute, 5 minute or 3 minute increments, after which the camera will cut and start a new clip. It's basically a safety measure really, so that if the camera does for whatever reason cut out, it cuts straight back in again with the next clip, which is actually quite convenient. It also means you're not having to dig through hours and hours of footage just to get one little section of an incident or something that you want to capture for whatever reason. So actually that is really quite useful. So here we are looking at some of the footage that I took on the camera. This was a couple of days ago at this point, just driving back from a friend's house. I'll largely just let the footage speak for itself really. As you can see, it's pretty decent really. For a camera that only costs 20 quid, I think, as I said before, you can't expect too much, but the video quality is really pretty decent. As you can see in the bottom corner, you can add a date stamp in, or a date and time stamp I should say, which is quite useful for insurance purposes, because you can obviously verify that the footage was taken at the date that you had the incident, which is quite convenient. But yeah, I will let the video play for itself, and I will thank you for watching now, and hope that you have enjoyed. Okay, bye.
DUPs, the barrier for the Conservatives to be able to continue in office after election has just gone up. Basically, unless the Conservatives win this election, it is extremely unlikely that Boris Johnson, which would be completely frictionless in my opinion, and with the rest of the world. And finally, and very briefly, for those exhausted, you're saying you have different views, but you could and would work together on that sort of thing. I think we agree on quite a lot, actually.
It's the only way forward.